Of course, it's sad, but this is sport, but it seems like to be a challenge for me, and I like to accept like tough challenges.
If you had told me this years ago, I would have completely lost my mind.
If you had told me that years ago, I would have, my mind.
Those words came from Alex Eala after a week in early April 2026 training on indoor clay in Mallorca under Toni Nadal's direct supervision. One 20-year-old Filipina, one legendary clay architect, and only a handful of weeks before Roland Garros. That is not ordinary preparation. It is a signal, and what happened between Mallorca, Linz, and Stuttgart explains why so many people suddenly started attaching Aryna Sabalenka's name to Eala's rise. A few weeks earlier, most of the conversation around Eala was still tied to the hard-court surge that pushed her into the global spotlight. Then she went back to the Rafa Nadal Academy for a clay block built around movement, sliding, and feeling the ball on red dirt, with Toni Nadal helping guide the process beside her regular team. This was not a cosmetic stop for cameras. It was targeted work ahead of Madrid, Rome, and the heaviest clay examination of all. In Paris, by April 7th and April 14th, the first returns on that investment were already showing up on the scoreboard. This is where the story needs discipline. There is no verified quote of Aryna Sabalenka publicly going off about Alex Eala, Toni Nadal, or this clay upgrade. No press conference blast, no social media rant. The tennis world is buzzing with reaction videos claiming the world number one felt threatened, but the real conflict is larger than one unconfirmed headline. Clay is the surface that exposes everything. Footwork gets judged. Patience gets tested. Recovery steps matter as much as raw power. And now Eala is learning those details from the same academy culture that shaped the greatest clay legacy the sport has ever seen. Sabalenka has earned her place at number one. That part is not under dispute. But that is exactly why this development lands with so much force. Eala is not studying against a weak era or a vacant throne. She is trying to sharpen her game for the surface that decides reputations while the strongest names in the sport are still standing in front of her. Early April in Mallorca gave the first hard proof. Eala trained on indoor clay under Toni Nadal's watch, and the reporting around those sessions was consistent. Movement, sliding, and the feel of the ball on red dirt were the focus. This was not a full-time coaching takeover, and that matters. Toni's role is advisory, mentoring, surgical, the kind of intervention that can change a surface without changing the entire identity of a player. And Eala took that work straight into competition. On April 7th in Linz, she opened her clay season with a 6-4, 6-3 win over Julia Grabber. Clean, controlled, straight sets. A few days later, Jelena Ostapenko still got through, but only after a 6-4, 7-5 fight that made Eala earn every game and made viewers pay attention to the details inside the scoreline. That is how real upgrades often arrive, not with a trophy on day one, but with visible changes before the results fully catch up. Put yourself across the net from that version of Eala for a moment. You already know she can redirect pace from the baseline. Then the sliding looks steadier, the spacing looks cleaner, and the rally tolerance starts stretching 1 or 2 extra balls longer on clay. That is not decoration. Against elite players, those extra balls are where matches swing. Linz also gave the first pattern clue. This was not random experimentation from a young player searching for answers. Miami had already proven Eala could belong on big stages. Mallorca showed she was willing to rebuild pieces of her game anyway. Then Linz revealed the purpose, not just to survive on clay, but to become difficult there. That is why the Sabalenka noise needs to be understood properly. There are dozens of thumbnails and reaction titles trying to sell an outburst that has no verified foundation. What they are really responding to is the symbolism. When a rising 20-year-old gets access to Nadal clay knowledge before Roland Garros, the internet reaches for the biggest name on the board because the top of the WTA is the standard Eala is now chasing. And even without a single confirmed Sabalenka quote, the contrast tells its own story. The number one player represents the established order. Eala represents the next wave arriving with sharper tools than people expected. On a surface where pedigree matters, that is why this story carries heat even when the supposed feud does not exist. Then came the human moment that changed the whole tone of the story. Eala did not talk about Toni Nadal with cold professionalism.
So great, and we're so blessed to have, Toni as part of the team.
She said, "It's fantastic, and I feel truly privileged to have Toni as part of my team." She said, "It's so great, and we're so blessed to have Toni as part of the team. He really has that knowledge, obviously, and he's really able to help my team. Just a great experience overall." And then she delivered the line that made this feel bigger than a training anecdote.
If you had told me that years ago, I would have, my mind would have been blown.
If you had told me this years ago, I would have completely lost my mind. I wouldn't have believed you. That is not the language of a player going through the motions. That is the sound of a breakthrough becoming real in her own mind. Fans who saw something special in Eala before the ranking dips, before the early clay losses, before the wider tennis world caught on, they were not reading fantasy into her rise. They were recognizing the scale of the path in front of her before the rest of the sport had the nerve to say it out loud. Greg Rusetsky's words matter here because they come from someone the sport has listened to for years. He is a former top 10 player, a longtime commentator, and an analyst who understands exactly how surfaces change careers. Speaking about Eala's academy work on clay, Rusetsky said, "Being at the academy with Rafa on clay, she knows what to do. It's going to be harder for people to hit a hole through her." That is a serious endorsement. He is not selling fantasy. He is identifying a tactical shift. If players find it harder to hit through Eli on clay, then rallies lengthen, pressure transfers, and matches stop following the script that higher-ranked opponents expect. That is how dangerous players are made on this surface, not always by overwhelming people, but by refusing to break where others assume they would. The future calendar is what turns this from a nice story into a live one. Madrid is next. Rome follows. Then Roland Garros arrives in late May, the one tournament where clay credentials are not a bonus but a demand. Eala is no longer entering that stretch as a player defined only by hard-court excitement. She is entering it with Nadal school clay input, recent match reps, and a growing sense that her game can travel. That matters for more than one player's season. For years, breakout conversations around Asian stars were too often boxed into faster courts and cleaner first-strike tennis. Eala is pushing against that limit. For Filipino fans and for Southeast Asian audiences who rarely get handed a genuine clay contender to believe in, this is representation with technical substance behind it, not a marketing slogan, a real tennis evolution. The prediction now becomes defensible. By the time the Roland Garros draw is set, seeded players will not be eager to see Eala in their section. If the Mallorca work keeps translating through Madrid and Rome, a second-week run in Paris moves from distant hope to legitimate possibility, not certainty. Possibility with teeth. Still, the scoreboard has already delivered its warning that this story is unfinished. On April 14th in Stuttgart, Leylah Fernandez beat Eala 6-1, 6-4 in the round of 32. That was Eala's second early clay exit in a row after the Ostapenko loss in Linz. The result matters because it strips the fantasy away. Toni Nadal's presence is not magic, and clay lessons do not become instinct in a single week. But what follows is just as important. There is no injury detour, no shutdown, no retreat from the surface. The clay swing keeps moving, which means the work goes right back into live fire at Madrid and Rome. That is how meaningful transformations happen in professional tennis, not in a perfect line, but under pressure, in public, with every weakness forced into daylight. Indoor clay in Mallorca, a 6-4, 6-3 opening win in Linz, a tight fight with Ostapenko, a blunt reminder from Fernandez in Stuttgart, and above all, that one sentence from Eala: she would have lost her mind if someone had told her this years ago. That is the story. A 20-year-old Filipina is walking into the most important clay stretch of her life with guidance from the man who helped build the King of Clay's foundation, and the rest of the tour has been given notice whether it wants the drama or not. So here is the question that matters. With Toni Nadal helping shape her clay instincts, does Alex Eala make her statement first in Madrid, in Rome, or does she save the shock for Roland Garros itself? If you understood what those Mallorca sessions meant before the headlines turned noisy, this channel is where that kind of read gets respected. Subscribe and join the crowd that spots the shift before the bracket does, because the next chapters of this story are no longer hiding in theory. They are coming on clay, one tournament at a time.